I'm not exactly pretty-faced, and to be blunt, I'm overweight. Yet, despite this, a man married me, a man I genuinely loved. Now that I'm pregnant, he told me, I hate poor people like you. I'm gonna divorce you, a fat and ugly woman like you. Raise the child in your belly on your own. I can't believe he said such hurtful things to me. I wonder how he could say that to me. My name is Catherine. Growing up, I was never the center of attention, always in the quieter groups. To be honest, I've always been on the heavier side, and I'm well aware I don't have a traditionally cute face. So, I never really had admirers. But, surprisingly, I was quite athletic in school and was one of the top performers during PE. The female gym teacher would often compliment me, saying, Catherine, you're so flexible and healthy. Your skin even glows more than anyone else's. I suppose being top-notch in PE was the only area where I could shine. And having a gym teacher notice that made me incredibly happy. After high school, I chose to attend a beauty and health vocational school. I genuinely enjoyed learning about makeup techniques, body mechanics, and how to maintain good posture. I was among the top students. And I felt this was my calling. Eventually, I found a job at a spa that offered massages. It wasn't a big company, and the pay wasn't great. But I felt a sense of purpose, and many clients requested me. The spa wasn't exclusively for women, men could also get oil massages and relaxation massages. One of the male clients was Bob. Bob once said, after one of my massages, You're really good. I don't think I can get a massage from anyone but you. He praised me a lot. He even advised, Why not spread your skills more? You're that good. It felt great to be complimented on something I'm confident in, so I naturally developed feelings for him. I mean, anyone can do what I do. But yeah, I trained all the staff here. I replied modestly, but deep down, I was falling for Bob. Perhaps he sensed my feelings. Because he eventually asked me out. Bob knew many trendy places, and he was fun to talk to. Being with him always lifted my spirits, and I started thinking of marriage. And maybe he sensed that too. Because he proposed, and we got married. It felt like the peak of my life. I mean, I never stood out in school, wasn't particularly pretty, and was overweight. Because of that, I never experienced being popular or sought after. Yet, I was able to marry such a wonderful man. We rented a small apartment and began our life as a married couple. I imagined a future filled with endless smiles and happiness. I would even daydream to that extent. But those hopes were too idealistic. The times of such joyful smiles didn't last very long. My sister became the source of trouble in our marriage. Yes, I have an older sister named Rachel. Rachel was the opposite of me, pretty and with a great figure. She was always popular with the boys in school, and she's dated so many that I doubt she can even keep track. But to be honest, I never really liked Rachel. She always looked down on me because of our contrasting appearances. Catherine, look at this dress. Isn't it cute? You should try wearing something like this. Oh, but I doubt it'd fit you. The dress would probably feel so sorry. She teased, laughing. Another time, she said, Oh my, someone confessed their feelings to me again, even though I told them I have a boyfriend. I must be super attractive. Catherine, you're lucky, you probably don't have such problems, right? She would often make these annoying remarks. But I couldn't retort because Rachel wasn't wrong. I'd always hoped to avoid her as much as possible since she was always like this. But suddenly, Rachel started visiting the apartment where Bob and I lived. It was right around the time when I found out I was pregnant. Unexpectedly, Rachel said with sincerity, Catherine, you're pregnant? Congratulations! Hearing that, I was a bit shocked. Maybe her perspective changed since I got married. My feelings of surprise turned to joy. However, I felt a bit off shortly after. After looking around our place, she asked, Is Bob not home today? I thoughtlessly told her he was at work, but she kept talking about him. So, what's Bob like? Does he get weekends off? Where do you guys usually go for dates? I was bombarded with questions. I felt she spent more time talking about that than my pregnancy. It started to bring back all the negative feelings I had about her, but she just asked her questions and then left. The short interaction left me feeling drained. But after that, almost every weekend, Rachel started coming over. Bob was home on weekends, and initially, Rachel was all smiles and greeted him. "Bob, you're gonna be a dad soon. Congratulations." But, as her visits became frequent, she began to focus her attention solely on Bob, barely acknowledging me. Moreover, she started showing up in stylish clothes she usually wouldn't wear. I've never been much of a catch, but after all, I'm still a woman. I could see through Rachel's intentions. She was definitely coming to see Bob. It was evident from the way her voice and expressions became more feminine around him. Despite my growing discomfort, the bond between them seemed to be strengthening. I had always believed that Bob wouldn't fall for someone like Rachel, especially now that he's my husband. But as time passed, I began to feel an unsettling atmosphere, like my trust in him was being eroded. While Rachel and Bob's relationship appeared to grow closer, Bob's attitude towards me seemed to be cooling. Usually, when he'd come home from work, he'd say with a bright voice, "I'm home. I've had a long day and can't wait to eat your cooking." And during dinner, he'd praise, "This is so delicious. I'm so lucky to eat your cooking every day." However, a few weeks after Rachel started visiting, those kind words vanished. Instead of his usual demeanor, when Bob came home from work, he'd sigh and grumble. "Man, today was exhausting. Why on earth does the boss talk so darn long?" And during dinner, he started to complain. "I really wanted to eat some meat today. This isn't filling at all." I felt increasingly lonely and finally confronted Bob. "Hey, have you been irritated lately? Why does every day seem so miserable to you?" To my surprise, Bob shot me an angry glare. Something I hadn't seen even when we were dating. "What? I don't want to hear that from you. You don't understand anything. After all, you just work some slow-paced job and earn peanuts." His words felt harsh, almost like verbal abuse. I was deeply hurt, on the verge of tears. I never wanted to fight, but I couldn't stay silent either. "I don't work slowly, and my salary isn't that low." Before I could say more, Bob cut me off. "That's enough. I'm gonna take a bath and then hit the hay." And with that, he headed straight to the bathroom. From then on, Bob often came home late and was constantly on his phone when he was home. I had a growing sense of unease. Especially since I was nearly 7 months pregnant. I didn't want to think negatively, but there were things I couldn't help but wonder about. One day, I gently prodded. "Rachel hasn't been around lately, has she?" Indeed. Rachel, who used to visit almost weekly, had suddenly stopped coming. However, Bob nonchalantly replied, "Who knows? Rachel lives in the next town over. If we wanted to see her, we could any time." This response alarmed me. I had never mentioned that Rachel lived in the neighboring town. Moreover, Rachel had just moved there barely a month ago. By that time, she had already stopped coming to our apartment. Unable to contain my suspicions any longer, I blurted out, "How do you know Rachel lives in the next town? Are you hiding something with her? It sure seems like it." I finally blurted it out clearly. It was clear how much Bob meant to me, which is why I expressed myself so emotionally. I expressed my feelings so strongly just because I wanted to convey how I felt. But Bob seemed indifferent. Instead, he smirked and said, all right, I get it. If you're gonna be this way, we should just break up. Honestly, I'm not into women who've put on weight like you. And with your low earnings, life ain't fun. I don't like being poor. Divorce might be our only option." I was overwhelmed with shock, anger, and sadness. Especially with our baby on the way. "That's so cruel. What about our child?" In rapid succession, he retorted. "Raise the kid by yourself. I'm not gonna be that child's father anymore. Look, I like beautiful women with great figures like Rachel. I've decided to marry Rachel once I divorce you. So, you're useless to me now. I married you because you were good at massages and seemed like you'd handle the housework, but I'm over it. He was just going off. I couldn't even get a word in. But being told such blunt truths made me change my feelings instantly. There's no point being with this man anymore. Actually, I realized I didn't want to be. Surely, Bob and Rachel had something going on. With my feelings completely cooled, I told him, "All right, let's break up then. Take care." Then, I handed him the business card of the divorce attorney I had prepared, foreseeing this situation. "Wow, you're quick. I can divorce you right away with this. Once it's finalized, I might just head over to Rachel's place. You can keep living your broke life." Bob was all excited as he took the business card, but if he truly planned on marrying Rachel, that excitement would probably fade pretty quickly, wouldn't it? But he didn't seem to realize that yet. So, I immediately started preparing to move out. I quickly secured a new place and decided to live there for a while. My belly was starting to show, and I was thinking of taking a break from work. About a month after I left our home, my phone rang one day. It was Bob. Even if I didn't answer, I knew what he wanted. Still, I picked up to settle things. His voice was frantic. "Hey, where are you? Do something, come on." I calmly responded, "I'm in one of the new luxury condos. It's spacious, has a great view, it's perfect." There was a pause from Bob. "What? How can someone broke like you afford such a place?" He'd probably think that way, wouldn't he? After all, he just assumed I was broke without knowing the whole story. But to be clear. Why? Because I have around $700,000 in savings. And my monthly income is around $50,000. He probably wouldn't believe it, but it was true. What I mean is, sure, the income from treatments at that workplace alone might not have been that much. However, the truth is, I was actually allowed to have a side job within that workplace. I taught remote massage classes online. At the workplace, I became an instructor, teaching beauty and health courses, including massage techniques. Initially, the spa owner appreciated my skills and knowledge, suggesting I try it. The staff at the same workplace also acknowledged that they improved faster thanks to my teachings. However, in the beginning, there wasn't much in terms of results. It was probably like that when I first started dating Bob too. Things changed, and now I have about 2,000 students nationwide. With a $50 membership fee, I made $100,000 monthly. I got half of it, so my share was really $50,000. When I told Bob this, he shouted, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? We wouldn't have divorced. And we could have lived in a better house." Too little, too late. He had always seen me as just a housemaid good for chores and massages. He'd always assumed I didn't earn much. Regarding the house choice with Bob, I told him, "I was matching your income level. After all, we agreed to split living expenses. So, if you're calling that a poor lifestyle, doesn't that mean your income isn't that great to begin with?" I made sure to say it plainly. And, to twist the knife further, I added sarcastically, "But, are you happy now that you married Rachel? I heard, you two really did get hitched. Congratulations." The reason this stings is because he must be facing hefty financial demands. "What the hell? I'm not happy at all. And what's this alimony about?" Indeed, I had consulted with a private investigator about Bob even before our divorce. So, after our divorce, I received evidence of him cheating with Rachel. So, I tried claiming compensation for emotional distress. But the tragedy doesn't end there for Bob. Turns out, Rachel had a significant debt, and she was making Bob pay for it. Rachel always attracted a lot of attention, and she was notorious for her affairs. Furthermore, Rachel had previously been through a divorce. The reason for their separation was Rachel's infidelity. Consequently, she had been charged with child support and property division due to that divorce. To cover these payments, Rachel had already accumulated a significant amount of debt. I was, of course, aware of this. Now, the situation is a reflection of Bob's decision to marry such a woman. Moreover, I'll also be claiming child support for the baby I'm carrying. So, with our divorce, Bob now faces a slew of hefty payments and has started a life burdened with debt. When I explained all this, Bob exclaimed, "Hey, the baby in your belly is mine, right? A child needs a father. Right, Catherine?" But who was the one who cruelly called me ugly and fat? Now, it's too late for such remarks, and there's no way I'm going to accommodate him. If you need money, why not spread your skills to everyone? You told me, remember? That everyone would benefit from Catherine's expertise. I took that advice and look where I am now. You should do the same. I suggested. It's pretty ironic, really. Because even though he was the one who suggested it, I was the one who acted on his advice, earning a high income. He neglected to notice my growing income and rashly labeled me as poor and then discarded me. Now, he's the one leading a life of poverty. Nowadays, Rachel keeps telling him, "What's wrong with you? I thought you were a capable man, but you're nothing but common folk. Work harder and earn more money. You're just a man to repay my debts." Come to think of it, when Rachel asked about Bob in the past, I thought it would be best to speak slightly favorably of him, so maybe I embellished the truth a bit. But all things considered, since both have similar life stories and ended up together, maybe they should just figure things out together. That's what I conveyed before ending the call. Nowadays, Bob is working day and night, juggling his main job and side jobs, trying to repay the massive debt he's incurred. All while Rachel, his wife, doesn't seem to be working earnestly at all. It's a living nightmare. Well, can't be helped. Bob not only abandoned me, but also the child in my womb. It's only fitting as a punishment. On the other hand, a couple of months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. While he's been dealt the card of not having a father, my parents and my workplace's owner have been supportive, and the child is growing up well. The initial months of raising a child meant I couldn't engage in any work-related activities, but fortunately, I had savings. Unexpectedly, even after my temporary retirement, my archived instructional videos kept generating steady income. Thanks to that, my child and I are leading a comfortable life. This is today's dinner. Pizza and hamburgers are good, right? Huh? What's this? Frozen food again? We've been having frozen food a lot lately. Don't you think it's disrespectful to a man who's been working all day? I'm sorry. I'm just nearing my due date and it's really tough. Enough already. You really don't lift a finger, do you? Must be nice living like that. True, lately, because of my late pregnancy, we've had a lot of frozen meals, but why do I alone have to struggle and push through when my husband doesn't help at all, not just with meals but with chores too? He's still mad. I thought to myself, trying to smoothly change the topic. Hey, I forgot to get the mail from the mailbox. Can you grab it for me? I didn't want to upset him more with the frozen food issue, so I reluctantly got up and headed for the front door. And then, in the next moment, I heard the distinct click of the front door locking behind me. Hey, what's the big idea? You take people for granted too much. If you love frozen foods so much, why don't you freeze outside? I didn't have my phone with me. How could I spend all night outside in below freezing temperatures? As I started to panic, a man approached from behind. When I explained my situation to him, I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home wife. My husband and I got married 3 years ago, and we're still just the two of us living together. My husband, who works at a small business, and I, a stay-at-home wife, weren't exactly rolling in dough. However, we were content with our current lifestyle. Above all, we were overjoyed when we had a baby last month. Every day was a blessing. I'm home. I picked up some deli food from the supermarket today. Thanks. I'm sorry for being such a handful with my morning sickness. It's okay. I'm gonna hop in the shower now. Being pregnant was a first-time experience for me, and everything felt new. I had heard from friends who had been pregnant about the struggles of morning sickness, but mine was much worse than the usual. Not only household chores, but even getting up to go to the bathroom was a struggle when I was lying on the couch. However, my husband was understanding and supported me like a true gentleman. This made me believe that I could get through this tough phase. Many of my friends had husbands who weren't as understanding during pregnancy. Knowing I didn't have that problem was a relief. However, we have my parents' 30th birthday anniversary tomorrow, so we're going to my family's place. I'm sorry, can I maybe skip it? It's just, the 3-hour drive one way might be too much for me right now. I've always been there for you. The least you can do is listen to me once in a while. It's pretty thoughtless of you to consider missing my parents' big day. It's true that I've always been grateful for his parents. I would love to attend if I could. When we announced our pregnancy, they came to celebrate, and even helped with some wedding costs. They've always been kind to us. But, even considering how much I appreciate them, my morning sickness was just too intense to think about attending their 60th celebration. I believe my husband understands that I'm suffering from morning sickness, but he can't truly feel what it's like. So, it seems like he really wants me to attend no matter what. We can visit them another day. Would that be okay? I think your mother-in-law would understand. We're always indebted to my folks. It's plain rude not to go. Plus, I already told them you're fine and gonna come, so don't look too sick in front of them. I get where he's coming from, but he could be a little more considerate about my situation. Stress is the worst enemy during pregnancy. And his parents' place is a 3-hour drive away from here. We'd leave early in the morning and probably return late at night. But if he's already told them we're coming, it's hard for me to back out. And I didn't want to argue further and worsen his mood, so I reluctantly agreed. Thankfully, I had medication to lessen my morning sickness, and I decided to take it before we left the next day. As expected, I felt terrible in the morning, but thanks to the meds, I felt a bit better. I thought, maybe I can get through just this one day. So, we headed to his parents' place. Their house was out in the countryside, and as we got closer, the roads got worse. The bumpy ride made me feel even sicker, and just the thought of taking the same route back home weighed on my mind. But I tried to compose myself before we arrived. The roads were busy being the weekend, and it took about 3.5 hours. But when I finally arrived at his parents' place, I took a few deep breaths to compose myself before entering. It's been a while. Thank you so much for coming. I told James it would be okay if he came by himself, knowing you weren't feeling well. Are you really okay? I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. I figured. My mother-in-law, having given birth to James and his brother, understood morning sickness more than I did. She knew the struggles and was concerned about me right from the get-go. If my mother-in-law was saying all that, I felt like I probably didn't need to come in the first place. But since I was already there, complaining to my husband now wouldn't help. Besides, the main focus was on the two people celebrating their 60th birthday, and I tried my best not to draw unnecessary attention. But it's pretty exhausting, both physically and mentally, to be on my guard all day. By the time we left, I think my fatigue was evident. I didn't want to inconvenience my driving husband, so I didn't sleep in the passenger seat, even though I wanted to. Why did you look so bored? Huh? I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. My parents are there. You know you have to be more considerate, right? Yeah. I'm sorry. I do think I looked tired before we left his parents' place. My mother-in-law even said, sorry for keeping you up so late, especially being pregnant, when we were leaving. I understand that my husband might be upset about that, but I wish he'd be more considerate of how I'm feeling first. It's not like I complained, and even with the morning sickness, I tried my best all day to not let it show. Usually, if I can't handle the housework, I'd rest. Wouldn't a simple "were you okay" in the car have been nice? It's like I didn't endure or sacrifice anything. Why can't he understand my feelings more? Such feelings welled up inside me, but I thought anything I'd say to my husband now would just add fuel to the fire. Whether it's morning sickness or whatever, he only seemed to focus on the fact that I looked tired in front of his parents, and seemed oblivious to anything else. Then came a sermon from him, and after it seemed he was satisfied, he went silent. The 2-hour ride home was filled with an indescribable tension. By the time we got home, it was past 10 p.m., and I was completely drained. Of course, having driven such a long distance, he must have been even more tired than I was. But I was at my limit and immediately laid down on the couch. Just when I felt relieved, a wave of sleepiness hit me. I thought, if I fall asleep now, that won't be good. I need to at least change my clothes and get to the bedroom. As I was grappling with these thoughts, "Hey, there's no beer in the fridge." "What? Didn't you put any in after drinking last night? At least manage that much." "I'm gonna take a bath, so go buy some now." "What? Now? It's already past 10 p.m., and I've been exhausted all day from morning sickness. Asking me to go out and buy it now. That's just devilish, isn't it?" In other words, given how he's been pushing me, I've been feeling that he might not care about me as much as he did when we first got married, but I never imagined it would be to this extent. He was grumpy in the car too. I figured he'd get really mad if I refused, but I'm seriously at my limit. There's no way I'm walking to the convenience store to buy beer at this hour. Come on, that's just not possible. I'm exhausted, and I had a rough day with the morning sickness. I've told you this so many times. To me, that's just a bunch of irrelevant talk. I'm gonna take a bath now, so make sure you get it before I get out. If not, I'm seriously gonna be pissed. With that, my husband, looking at me with cold, accusing eyes, went straight to the bathroom without listening to anything I had to say. The look on my husband's face, glaring at me as if I were some sort of villain, made it clear he was dead serious. After he went to the bath, I let out a frustrated sigh and hit the couch hard with my fist. If I don't go now, I really don't know what'll happen next. This will be my last chore for the night. I'll finish shopping before he gets out of the bath and head straight to bed. With that in mind, I hurried to the convenience store, bought 3 beers, and rushed home. Luckily, my husband, who tends to take long baths, hadn't come out yet. After putting the beers in the fridge, I headed straight for the bedroom. As soon as I changed and lay down, I fell asleep as if I had passed out. I guess I was that tired, and I'm impressed I pushed myself this far. I really want to give myself a pat on the back. My husband, after enjoying his nightly drinks, must have slept in because he didn't wake up until midday the next day. Morning sickness was still bad, but it was somewhat better than the day before. Thinking I should get things done while I can, I managed to finish most of the house chores by mid-morning. As my belly grew larger, every task felt heavier, and the supportive husband I knew at the beginning of my pregnancy was nowhere to be seen. He used to be there for me, but now he just complains. I don't know what changed his attitude, but I've been doing my best every day so he won't complain, and both mentally and physically, I've been exhausted. Fast forward, and I'm now in my final month of pregnancy. Raising the child will surely be a challenge once they're born, but at least this tough pregnancy journey is coming to an end. Thinking that I'll finally meet our beloved baby soon, a sense of excitement was slowly building in my heart, different from the tough days I've been through. Welcome home. You're late, aren't you? Got some work stuff. What's for dinner tonight? Was thinking of having the pizza and burgers I got from Costco the other day. Seriously? Frozen food again. You making fun of me? I'm pregnant, and doing housework is all I can handle right now. If my husband helped with the regular chores, I could adjust my energy and time for cooking. But right now, it's impossible for me to do everything. He gets super angry if I don't do the chores, even though I have to cut down on cooking time. I wish he'd help out a bit if he's gonna complain. My husband, who's about to become a father soon, doesn't act like one at all. Wondering if this is really gonna work out, I decided to speak my mind because I've been holding back a lot. Look. It's impossible for me to do everything by myself. It'd be nice if you helped. When you have time, you're always out drinking or playing golf. You're hardly ever home. I'm about to give birth, so expecting me to be perfect is just unreasonable. Are you trying to go against me? I'm just stating the facts. I figured he'd definitely get mad at me for saying all that. But I was at my breaking point. I spoke my mind without holding back my emotions. After I finished speaking, I calmed down, bracing myself for the lecture I was sure my husband would give me. But shockingly, he just started fiddling with his phone without saying a word. Weird. Why isn't he yelling at me today? Earlier, I couldn't hold back and said something pretty harsh. Normally, my husband would have snapped back at me tenfold. Maybe the mention of being almost due made him realize his responsibility as a soon-to-be father for the first time. Well, anyway, I'm just glad nothing happened, and that night, we had frozen food for dinner. Because he came home late, we didn't finish dinner until around midnight. After taking a bath, it was past 1 a.m. when I was ready for bed. Hey, before you go to bed, can you check the mailbox? Now? At this hour? What's the big deal? It's just a small thing. Was he still upset about me serving frozen food for dinner, I wonder? Well, he hasn't been nagging me as he usually does, so I don't want to push it. And checking the mailbox will only take a minute. Doing as he asked, I went to the gate to check the mailbox. I did just as husband told me, heading to the front gate to check the contents of the mailbox. But there was nothing inside. I wonder what he wanted me to see. It was deep winter, and temperatures were well below freezing at night. Dressed in thin pajamas, I nearly froze as I hurried back towards the house. But, just as I reached for the doorknob, suddenly, there was a click from the inside, and the door was locked. What on earth? What's going on? Come on, let me in. It's below freezing, probably about as cold as inside a freezer, right? You seem to really love those frozen meals, so why not stay out here and freeze with them? What? No, wait! Hey! It seemed like husband had either gone to bed or was ignoring me. It was 2 in the morning, and it would be impossible to stay out in this freezing cold until dawn. Besides, I was only planning to check the mailbox and head right back, so I'm really underdressed. I felt like I might freeze to death. My face and hands were burning from the cold, and my body was shivering uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were becoming foggy. I repeatedly pressed the doorbell, hoping husband would come to my aid, but there was no response from him. Was this his way of getting back at me for using frozen food? I hoped he'd let me in after a few minutes, so I kept calling out to him from outside. But time just went by, and there was no sign of husband. I was getting so cold that I was running out of energy. How much longer would I have to wait? Just as I was thinking this, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. What happened to you? What? I was taken aback by this unfamiliar man, but he appeared to be a bartender who worked at a nearby bar. Since he usually slept during the day, I'd never run into him before. It seems he closed up shop early that day and was returning home around 2 a.m. when he ran into me. What's going on? At the very least, let me get you something to wear. Though he was a stranger in the neighborhood, his gesture of offering his coat without inviting me into his home felt genuinely gentlemanly. It made me trust him, at least a little. He continued to listen to my story outside my house. Of course, normally I'd never share personal family matters with a stranger, but I was so emotionally overwhelmed at the moment, it wasn't the time to be concerned about that. I borrowed his cell phone and reached out to some folks I knew. I promised to repay him later and decided to spend the night at a business hotel. Once I reached the warm hotel room, a sense of relief washed over me, and I quickly drifted off to sleep. Before I knew it, morning had come. After checking out, I headed home. To my surprise, waiting at the gate were my in-laws. I expressed my gratitude for them coming so quickly after my call last night. But the moment I stepped onto the property, I was left speechless.
What? What on earth are you doing?
There was my husband, freezing, without any clothes on. Even in the morning, the temperature hadn't risen above 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Why wasn't he wearing anything? It made no sense. But what was even stranger was the glaring look my in-laws were giving him. Could it be? Did they do this? As these thoughts ran through my mind and I tried to grasp the situation. That foolish son of ours. I'm truly sorry. We came over right after it happened and disciplined this idiot. Discipline. I knew it. The whole situation was orchestrated by my in-laws. When the bartender helped me out, I immediately borrowed his phone to call my mother-in-law. I was so lucky that mother-in-law picked up quickly and that I remembered mother-in-law number. I honestly told mother-in-law everything that had happened with my husband and the recent incident. And there was another thing. I shared a shocking suspicion with mother-in-law that I had heard from the bartender. Thank you for all you've done. It's the least we could do. And, as you mentioned, the rumors of his affair turned out to be true. We had a spare key to your house, so we came in early this morning and confronted our foolish son. Checked his phone, and there was clear evidence of his affair. I knew it. I felt a pang of pity for my husband, abandoned outside in the cold without any clothes, but the moment I confirmed his infidelity, any sympathy I had for him vanished. I had never considered the possibility of his cheating before. The suspicion arose just yesterday. The bartender told me he had seen my husband downtown with a younger woman. Because of his line of work in an area with lots of nightclubs and bars, he had seen my husband with a young lady a few weeks ago. Before we were married, we used to have barbecues in our backyard quite often, so I believe he recognized us. When I first heard about it, I didn't have any solid proof and I wanted to trust my husband, but if he had found someone new and stopped caring about me and stopped supporting me, especially while I'm pregnant, everything made sense. I had shared all of this with my in-laws over the phone, but to find out it was true, it's just disappointing.
If you're freezing, why don't you ask your beloved girlfriend to warm you up with her body warmth?
No, James looked as pale as a ghost, his lips turning a shade of purple. Considering the in-laws have been here for over 3 hours, he must have been left out in the cold for at least that long. Makes me wonder just how much he suffered. Well, he tried to do the same to me, so he's in no position to complain. He probably can't hold a proper conversation because the cold has numbed his mind. But honestly, I couldn't care less.
I think you know this, but I won't accept this. I'm gonna file for divorce. What?
He already looked pretty miserable from the cold, but at the mention of divorce, his face went even paler. I figured if he was treating me like this and having a good time with his mistress, she must be more important to him. Then again, maybe he's just scared of the potential alimony and child support. Either way, I doubt he ever loved me, and I don't have a shred of love left for him either.
I'm gonna sue your lover for emotional damage too, so you better be ready. Hold on, let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. I'll decide on the alimony and child support. You don't have a choice in this. Know your place.
Father-in-law chimed in with a firm tone, leaving husband speechless. Of course, he probably wants to get inside the house quickly to escape the freezing cold, but I think he's even more devastated about what's to come. But, he's only ever acted selfishly, so this is all a result of his own actions. He's probably gonna regret this for the rest of his life, and I hope he does. With those thoughts in mind, I decided to move back to my parents' place and leave husband for my in-laws to handle. I could tell just by looking at him that he was so frail he might need to go to the hospital. But he tried to do the same thing to me, so I have absolutely no reason to be concerned. After returning to my parents' home, I confessed everything to them. They told me it was okay to stay and raise my child there, for which I couldn't be more grateful. I decided I wanted to focus on giving birth first, so I asked my in-laws to wait until after the birth before confronting my husband. Being close to my due date, about 2 weeks after returning home, I gave birth to a big baby boy, weighing nearly 8 pounds. The moment he was born, he cried out loud, and I was so moved that I shed tears, feeling the reality of becoming a mother. For the next 3 months, I devoted myself to parenting at my parents' place. As I began to get used to life with a baby, I asked my mother-in-law and father-in-law to come visit us near my parents' home. Wow, what a healthy little boy. Congratulations on the birth. I'd always been treated well by my in-laws and, under the condition that husband wouldn't accompany them, I let them hold my son. The two of them, holding my son with smiles on their faces, looked like children themselves. I felt a pang of anger towards husband, thinking about how this should have been a happier celebration. But getting mad now seemed pointless. After spending some quality time with my son, my in-laws shifted the conversation back to my ex-husband and helped finalize discussions about alimony and child support. Thanks to their efforts over the past 3 months, the whole truth about my husband's affair came to light. We consulted a lawyer they knew, and it was decided he'd pay me the standard amount. Of course, I couldn't trust a husband who cheated, so he made a lump sum payment. He took out a loan to cover the alimony, but when it came to 20 years of child support, that was too much for him to handle, even with a loan. My in-laws graciously stepped in to help. With the divorce finalized, he's now just a stranger to me. Ex-husband's gonna pay my in-laws monthly for the child support they covered. From what I heard, it turned out that ex-husband hadn't even told his mistress he was married. She dumped him when she found out, leaving him all alone. He's now living with his parents and giving them 90% of his earnings to repay the debt. The remaining 10% barely covers his food, leaving him with no spending money. I'm not sure how long he'll continue this way, but with no savings and only the passing of time, once he's paid off his debt to his parents, it seems they might kick him out. Even when he's free from this financial hell, it seems he's got nothing but despair ahead of him. Well, he brought this upon himself, so I guess he's getting what he deserves. As for me, I'm living at my parents' house, doing my best to raise my child as a single mom. I'm still figuring out the ropes of parenthood, but my mom's been a great help, especially during those sleepless nights. It's made the whole experience mentally easier and enjoyable. I plan on relying on my parents for a while, and once my son starts elementary school, I think I'll get back to work. Plus, I still keep in touch with my in-laws and plan to visit them with my son a few times a year. While my ex-husband to ruin my life, I've got a precious new beginning with my baby, and I'm determined to lead a happy life from here on out. How could this happen in just 5 days? I screamed as I looked around the living room of my house. I had been admitted to the hospital to give birth, and in the 5 days until my discharge. The living room had become filled with the smell of rotting food. Unfinished frozen food was left on the desk, with the remnants of the leftovers. Scattered across the floor were plastic containers and trays, probably leftovers from some ready-made meals. Surrounding them, I could see lots of what appeared to be flies. Cleaning and tidying up is your job, right? So I just left everything as is until you got back. My husband, waving his hand irritably at the small insects flying around the light. He turned around and frowned upon seeing me, covering my nose from the stench. See, it's impossible to live in such a stinky room, isn't it? Hurry up and clean it. I was at a loss for words. Could my husband not see the baby in my arms? My name is Madison, a 28-year-old office worker. I've been working at the company I joined right after graduation, blessed with respectable supervisors and colleagues, and everything's been going well. A few years ago, I married Ethan, who I met at the same company, is 2 years older than me. After we got married, I continued working, and Ethan and I were good colleagues at the company, and after work, we were great partners, supporting and encouraging each other through our troubles. When we were about a year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. We were delighted since we wanted a child. Our parents and in-laws cried tears of joy when we told them. My in-laws have been kind to me since Ethan and I started dating. When I first went to their house to greet them before we got married, they welcomed me with open arms. After getting married, since our homes are close, Ethan's mother and I often go out on weekends, and we've built a good relationship. When I told Ethan, "Your parents are truly considerate and wonderful," he nodded and said, "Mom's been an amazing mother who's looked after me." Dad worked from dawn till dusk and wasn't home much, but he always showered us with love and gratitude towards Mom, which made me realize once again what a caring couple they are. After we got married, my mother-in-law would often express concern, saying, "Values have changed over the years, and as long as you and Ethan are happy with your lives, that's all that matters. But I worry that you, Madison, will be burdened with all the housework now that you're married and working." I reassured her with a smile, saying, "No need to worry. Ethan and I are splitting the chores well and helping each other out," and she seemed relieved. Actually, Ethan and I began living together after we got married. My mother-in-law knew this and was probably concerned about whether we could live together without any discontent. Of course, there were some worries about getting married without having lived together first. But Ethan was always kind to me during our dating period, never forgetting to be considerate even after many years. So I was confident that we could live together without any problems. True to my expectations, Ethan had been sticking to the promises we made since we started living together, and he never pushed all the responsibilities onto me. He even said he wanted to lessen my burdens more. Such a caring husband, after finding out about my pregnancy, told me to rely on him more when we were together since something might happen to our precious child. Despite his busy schedule, Ethan managed to take care of the household. In the early stages of my pregnancy, I suffered from morning sickness and often had to take time off work. I used to blame myself, having always managed to balance work and everything else before. Even when I saw Ethan going to work every day and felt that I should at least do some housework, I couldn't because I was feeling ill. When I cried and apologized to Ethan, saying, "I'm sorry, I couldn't do anything today," he'd reassure me, "Hey, no need to apologize. I've lived alone for a long time, so household chores are no big deal. Madison, you're doing your best to nurture our baby in your belly. I can't completely understand your hardship, so let me at least take care of our home." Lately, Ethan has been very studious, buying parenting books and diligently studying every day. Seeing him like this made me realize again how glad I am to have married him. My pregnancy went smoothly, and I spent it without any worries until the birth. My parents and in-laws would come by from time to check on us, and thanks to the support of those around us, the baby grew well in my belly. As the due date approached and my belly grew, I took maternity leave and now focus on staying healthy and calm. It's tough to go out with my belly so big, but I managed to make it to my prenatal checkups while taking care of myself. Recently, as I've entered the final month, my mother-in-law, who lives nearby, started accompanying me to the checkups because she's worried about me. She helps carry my backpack and other items, and while I feel a bit guilty, I'm also very grateful. At first, I felt guilty for having her come all the way with me and declined when my mother-in-law offered to accompany me. But she cheerfully said, "Now that my children are grown up, I have quite a bit of free time. Besides, attending your checkups is pretty much all I have to do. I'm certainly concerned about your health, but it also doubles as exercise for me, so it's a win-win situation." So, I began to rely on her and together we headed for the checkup that day. Then, one day, while I was getting my usual checkup at the hospital, I was suddenly struck by a pain in my stomach. The doctor, noticing something was wrong with me, calmly said while trying to reassure me, "I'll perform an internal examination right away." While I was nervously waiting for the results, the doctor said, "You're showing signs of labor, so you'll be admitted right away. We'll prepare for the delivery while monitoring you closely. You're going to meet your baby soon," he told me gently. However, it was also sudden that I was not mentally prepared. In the midst of this, my mother-in-law held my hand and reassured me, "It's going to be all right. I'll be right here with you, so don't worry." I reminded myself that I had to stay calm for my baby, and gradually I came to accept the situation and prepared myself for the imminent birth. I had calmed down a bit when my mother-in-law said, "I'm going to run home real quick to grab what you need. I'll be right back. I'll also give Ethan a call," and she dashed out of the hospital. A few minutes later, my mother-in-law came back and immediately asked me, "Are you okay? Are you in any pain or discomfort?"
Thank you so much. You've been a great help.
She held my hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. Just let me do this much. Ethan might be able to get off work early. He could still make it in time for the birth. I've already called your parents just in case." Her words reminded me that I had completely forgotten to inform my parents about the labor pain and my anxiety about giving birth. My parents, living in the next town over, which I'll equate to living in the next state over, might not make it before the birth, but they said they would come right away. Soon after, my father-in-law arrived, simply saying, "Oh, it's time," and watched over me from the corridor. Then, a while later, my parents arrived. While enduring the repeated labor pains, I waited for the moment to come. My parents deeply thanked my in-laws. "Thank you so much for everything, from getting things ready for the hospital stay to being by our daughter's side." And to me, they said, "It'll be over soon, take some deep breaths. We're all here with you, you'll be okay." My in-laws replied with a smile to my parents, "Oh, no worries at all. We're just glad we made it in time," and the whole family, except for my husband, surrounded me. I was growing more anxious as the intervals between the pains shortened, but having my whole family there was a great comfort. Several hours later, even though it was late into the night, I gave birth to a healthy baby. While waiting in the lounge near the nurse's station, trying not to disturb the other pregnant women and mothers, my in-laws and parents expressed their joy through silent hugs and high fives. Having finally given birth, I was overwhelmed with relief and moved by the sight of my newborn, though I felt a pang of disappointment that my husband was not by my side. He was supposed to have left work early, and I wondered why he hadn't come, but by the next morning, he still hadn't appeared. My in-laws called my husband numerous times, worrying that something had happened, but they couldn't reach him. Even at 9 a.m., my father-in-law went to our house. But my husband did not answer. Finally, when my mother-in-law contacted my husband's office, they were aware that I had been admitted for childbirth and said my husband had left work earlier than usual. It was supposed to be a day dedicated just to me, so he took the day off, and it seems like he didn't show up at the office. After that, the whole family was in a frenzy. If I'm not at home or the office, we thought maybe it was best to go to the police, and it was starting to turn into a big deal. However, just as it was about to be noon, the receptionist informed us that my husband had arrived. Relief was short-lived, and I couldn't help but feel anxious, wondering what on earth had happened. But as I was about to speak to my husband who had come to the hospital room, I was at a loss for words.
"Ah, so it's born."
It was all he said at first. His suit was disheveled, and his hair was a mess. As he got closer, I could even smell alcohol on him. I couldn't believe he might have gone drinking at a time like this, and when I looked at him, he showed no interest in our baby, instead staring intently at his smartphone. Trying to remain calm, I asked, "What have you been doing up until now?" Ethan, still half asleep, responded, "Sorry. I just went for a drink. It was an old friend I haven't seen in a while, and I couldn't say no. I've just been sleeping until now and got here late." He didn't take his eyes off his phone during this time, so my anger finally exploded. But before that, my father-in-law grabbed my husband's shoulders.
"What are you thinking? It doesn't matter if it's been a while or whatever. Meeting friends for drinks doesn't even compare to your wife giving birth. Why didn't you turn them down?"
My husband kept interrupting with "but." And it's just that. Eventually, he stopped talking altogether with a sullen face under the fiery glare of my father-in-law. After a heavy sigh, he left the hospital room without another glance at me or our baby. My father and father-in-law tried to follow him, but they couldn't keep up due to their age, and my husband never showed his face at the hospital during my stay. 5 days after giving birth, with the support of my family, both mother and child were healthy and we were discharged without any issues. As my mother and father, who had come from far away, "We're leaving," my mother-in-law said to them. "We're looking forward to seeing you again. Please leave your daughter to us," and on the day of discharge, she helped me get home with my father-in-law carrying the luggage. That morning, after being discharged, I texted my husband just to say I was going home, and he immediately called back. When I answered, he said, "Hey, Madison. I'm glad you're discharged safely. I'm gonna pick you up and we'll head home by car." I hadn't expected a call back from my husband and secretly hoped he might have reflected a bit. When I told my mother-in-law that my husband had called, she laughed and joked, "Well, if Ethan isn't busy, maybe he could come pick us up." I told my husband, "I was planning on having your parents send me, but I appreciate you coming to get me," and he said, "Got it. I'll have Mom and Dad head back right now." After informing them that my husband was coming to pick me up, my in-laws seemed relieved and went on their way. I thanked the hospital staff repeatedly and finished the paperwork before getting into my husband's car. He didn't apologize for before but seemed to be in high spirits as he drove. Soon we were home, and I felt like crying from the pain, even from such a short ride. Thinking about all the mothers in the world enduring this pain and persevering through parenting made me feel a little anxious. With my husband's previous enthusiasm for parenting, I had to psych myself up, believing it'll be all right. I chalked up the troubles during my hospital stay to him being tired or perhaps getting scolded by his dad more than he expected and sulking about it. I braced myself with the resolve that we would raise our baby together and opened the front door. Instantly, an appalling stench hit my nose. Hesitating to enter because of the unknown smell, my husband seemed unbothered and flung the living room door wide open. Immediately, the rotten odor of garbage overwhelmed me, making me feel nauseous. "Wow, that reeks. Hey, clean this up, will you?" he commanded authoritatively, a satisfied smirk on his face.
"I waited the 5 days you were in the hospital, so clean this up now. Can't live in a house that smells like this."
Holding our baby, I nearly collapsed on the spot but managed to restrain myself. "How can you live like this, to let the house get so dirty?" I asked, barely containing my anger, to which he nonchalantly replied that it just happened with eating and sleeping. Food left out. Washing, laundry, and trash are left everywhere. The house was in a deplorable state, unrecognizable as our home. Seeing the mess, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Stop joking around. You never showed up at the hospital, and you neglected all the housework. Before the birth, you used to help clean enthusiastically. Why have you suddenly stopped doing anything?" He responded incredulously, "Why should I be scolded? You love working, Madison. You worked hard even after we got married and until you took maternity leave. Housework is a wife's job, isn't it? I thought you'd be happy to have something to do when you got back, so I left it for you. Clean it up now that you're discharged." He had grown accustomed to the mess, nonchalantly relaxing on the couch in the fly-infested living room. It was impossible to live in such filth, let alone lay a clean towel down for the baby to sleep on. Attempting to clean while holding the baby was futile, so I yelled at my husband, who was scrolling on his phone.
"Do you really think I can clean up in this state? If you're not going to do it, hold our baby at the entrance. It's impossible to care for our baby in this mess."
He sighed in exasperation, "Why do I have to take care of it? Housework and parenting are your job. You're supposed to do these things, right? And since when did you start ordering me around so much? This is why women are no good. Still acting like you're pregnant even though there's no baby inside anymore. You're the worst, trying to make excuses and boss your husband around." I reached my breaking point.
"Enough! What's gotten into you? Why are you acting this way? What happened to you while I was in the hospital?"
Tears streamed down my face as I confronted him, and he groaned, avoiding my gaze. Then, as if psyching himself up with a slap to his cheeks, he stood up with determination.
"I've been too lenient with my wife, turning her into a useless woman, but not anymore. I've decided to properly educate my wife as a husband should," he declared, his face contorted with effort. "I've done my part. I went to pick you and the baby up from the hospital to ensure I wasn't completely detached from parenting. I've made it clear that housework and parenting are your responsibilities. I'm becoming a responsible husband."
Speechless at his transformation, I stood there as he announced, "I have plans to go out drinking with a buddy. Make sure the house is clean before I get back. Don't expect any help from me," and with that, he left. All I could do was stand there, unable to process the drastic change from the kind man I once knew. What could possibly have happened to turn the man who was once eager to share household duties and learn to be a good father into this? In my panicked state, the sight of the garbage-filled room pushed me over the edge, and tears began to fall, landing on my baby's cheeks. The baby, awakened by my crying, began to fuss, and I started crying out loud as well.
"Mom, I just don't understand anymore. Help me."
I pleaded as I sat in the entranceway and called my mother on my phone. As soon as the connection was made, I cried out, and my mother said, "I'll be right there," while my father drove her to me. She told me to wait outside rather than stay in the dirty house. Sitting on the front porch with my baby, I continued to cry quietly under the bright sunshine. When my parents arrived, my in-laws were with them. Upon seeing me, my mother-in-law immediately began to apologize profusely. My parents intervened to stop her, assuring that it was Ethan who was to blame. Once that was settled, I finally had a moment to ask why my in-laws were there in the first place. Tears welling up in her eyes, my mother-in-law confessed, "The truth is, we also doubted Ethan and feared he might be troubling you. So, we decided to secretly visit your house. That's when we bumped into your parents and they kindly gave us a ride here. I'm truly sorry for all the trouble our son has caused." I had to somehow stop the conversation from turning into another round of apologies. My father-in-law, who was so angry he looked like he might start yelling at any moment, didn't utter a single word. But the way his temples throbbed red and twitched told me he was on the verge of an outburst. Neither my mother-in-law nor my father-in-law could get through to Ethan on the phone. That darned son of mine. "Next time I see him, I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind," my father-in-law muttered, then took several deep breaths to calm down. After a while, he seemed more at peace and kindly said to me, "Now, you shouldn't be stressing yourself. Please, ride in my car. We'll handle the cleaning, just wait for us." With that, he and my mother-in-law took my child and me to the car and then entered the house. My parents followed suit, insisting on helping, and I could hear all four of their screams. No doubt they had opened the door to that bug-infested, foul-smelling living room. I hugged my baby tightly in the car, feeling terrible about the situation. Hours passed as my father-in-law went out to buy insecticide, and bags packed to the brim with trash were taken out to the collection area. Thanks to their efforts, when I entered the house again, there were no bugs, ventilation had been done, and the smell was much less offensive. It appeared they had cleaned every room, not just the living room. I felt a profound gratitude as my mother and mother-in-law prepared dinner. It had been a long time since I had someone else's home cooking. Having managed my diet strictly during pregnancy, it tasted even more delicious, and I polished it off in no time. The home-cooked meal helped ease my anger towards Ethan for a while. As we were waiting for Ethan's return, someone knocked at the door. Just as I rushed to see, my father-in-law reassured me, "You take it easy," and went to answer it. He answered and exclaiming, "Ethan?" I knew from my father-in-law calling my husband's name that Ethan had come home. I wondered why he would knock the door. While quietly trying not to wake the sleeping child, we all went to see. To my surprise, a man was dragging Ethan into the house. Ethan's face was red and swollen, and he was sobbing loudly. Upon seeing me, the man introduced himself, "Nice to meet you. I'm Michael, a friend of Ethan's. We went out for drinks, and that's when I heard about you and the baby. I had no idea, and I am terribly sorry for causing such distress during this challenging time." I was surprised, but had the man raise his head to see my husband still sobbing. Noticing my gaze, a man Michael said, "This guy was boasting about defeating his lousy wife in argument, so I asked for the details. Turns out, what he did was so terrible, and even though I told him to go home, he wouldn't listen and didn't understand what he'd done wrong, so I ended up hitting him. I'm sorry. Since the mood for drinking was gone, it seemed they had disbanded, but he couldn't leave my weeping husband behind and brought him home. As I was apologizing for the inconvenience, suddenly my husband raised his face and started yelling.
Just because you were out-argued, you resort to violence. That's why you can't get married. You're single because you don't understand that household chores and parenting are a wife's job. It's the worst to be punched out of nowhere by someone who's just an onlooker.
Look, I'm sorry for hitting you. I apologize for that. But seriously, what's going on with you? Last time we met, you were fine, right? Why are you suddenly saying stuff like a deadbeat husband? Michael said, clearly baffled. Feeling the same, I realized my husband's attitude had indeed changed abruptly. Ethan, you never said such things before I was hospitalized for childbirth. You said household chores and parenting are a wife's duty, and that the husband should come first. Why did you suddenly start thinking that way? When I asked again, my husband blurted out, household chores and parenting are a woman's job. That's what everyone says. I realized that I was wrong all along.
Who's everyone? Your coworkers? Friends? Who exactly are you talking about? I asked him straight in the face, to which he replied shortly, people on the social media. What? You're taking information from the internet at face value? Are you out of your mind?
Michael said, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. My husband, looking annoyed, thrust his smartphone at him. Look at this. It's obvious women should do household chores because they don't earn as much as men. Only women can have babies, so parenting is their job too. See, everyone agrees with this. Michael screamed in disbelief after looking at the screen. You believe this website? Are you insane? Taking the smartphone from Michael, I saw a website. It was belittling housewives, filled with countless stories praising the shoving of household and parenting duties onto wives. These opinions my husband referred to as everyone's were posted on an internet forum. Summarizing my still shouting husband's story, it seems he came across such sites right before I was hospitalized, and began to think that he was just pampering his wife, being a useless husband. While alone at home during my hospital stay, he kept visiting these sites, convinced that he had been wrong. He commented about changing himself on these sites and became hooked on the supportive comments he received. As a result, my husband was dyed with the belief that household chores and parenting are women's work because women are less capable at work and earn less money. If they have a complaint, they should just earn more. Unlike me, speechless with astonishment, both our parents and in-laws were furious. It's unthinkable. We didn't raise you to be like this, they said in unison. Michael, whom my husband looked to for salvation, said coldly, I'm disappointed. I can't be friends with someone like this. As of today, I'm cutting ties with you. I joined in, confronting my husband. First off, why should I prioritize the opinions of faceless strangers online over us? Are the people writing more trustworthy to you than we are? That made my husband look at me as if he had an epiphany. To top it off, my mother said sharply, with a cold look, it seems none of the important people here, your dear Madison, your parents, your friends, share those values. If you still think you're right, then I guess we'll have to leave you, because your thinking is different from Ethan's. My father also said, as things stand, I can't leave my precious daughter Madison with you any longer. Madison, it's not too late. We're ready to welcome you, and it's okay to rely on us if it's tough. Just then, as if a spell had been lifted, my husband, who had been raging just a moment before, suddenly calmed down.
No, but...
he kept repeating. When he looked up and saw my face clearly, his own turned pale as a ghost.
For me, the most important thing is Madison. I wanted to be a good husband for her, sought out loads of info, and then
With tears in his eyes, he prostrated himself before me with a burst of emotion. I'm so sorry, Madison. I was wrong. Seeing him like this, my father-in-law spoke in a calm voice. I have a question for you. When you were a kid, did you ever see me tell your mother that housework and parenting were a woman's job, or show that attitude? Did I appear that way to you as a father? He asked with tears in his eyes. My husband replied, Dad, you were always a wonderful father, fully supporting Mom by her side. Then he continued, I realized that I was too bound by what I read online, and I couldn't see what was around me. I'm truly sorry. Witnessing his sudden apologies, my parents said, Madison, it's up to you what to do next. We'll support you whatever you decide. After some thought, I told my husband there won't be another chance, and I decided to forgive him this time. Since then, my husband has woken up from the spell of extreme online opinions and is struggling with unfamiliar housework and parenting as he engages with our baby. I wonder how long this will last, but my in-laws and my own parents seem to share my feelings, as they continue to train him while he still strives on. He now says with concern, kids are adorable, but parenting is more physically demanding than I imagined. I now realize you've been doing all the housework and looking after the child alone while I'm at work. Thanks so much. If you're not feeling well, don't hesitate to rely on me. Looking at the smiling face of my husband holding our child, I think he might truly become a good father. I'm hoping these peaceful days will last forever.
It's all your fault for having a wedding with a woman like that when I'm around. I didn't like it, so I just ruined it.
I woke up in the hospital I was taken to, hearing my husband and best friend talking. I remember, in the middle of my long-awaited wedding, everything suddenly went black. As I continued to listen to their conversation, they started discussing something shocking. Sleeping pills. It turned out they were having an affair, and my best friend had added sleeping pills to my meal to sabotage the wedding. Knowing the truth, I decided to take revenge on them in my dazed state. My name is Michelle. I'm a stay-at-home mom living with my husband Tom and our son Michael. I've always had a complex about one thing. That we never had a wedding. 3 years ago, while I was pregnant with our child, Tom, who I was dating at the time, said, the order is a bit reversed, and proposed to me. I was over the moon about both the pregnancy and the proposal. However, my parents were strongly opposed. Even during the family gatherings, both families maintained their opposition. A shotgun wedding is out of the question. In response to my parents saying that, Tom's parents always seemed apologetic. And they assured me, no matter what decision you make, we'll make sure to take responsibility. Having an abortion wasn't an option for me, so I went against my parents' wishes and married Tom. At that time, we wanted a wedding but decided against it, considering the childbirth expenses. Now, almost 3 years after our son's birth, we still haven't had a wedding. It always bothered me. To someone like me, my husband finally said, let's have a wedding on Christmas. The reason being, I was gonna return to work at a hotel next spring, and our son was gonna start attending daycare. Knowing we'd be busier then, my husband felt we should have the wedding before that. Of course, I immediately agreed. I was so happy. Especially since my husband had been going out more often recently for drinks or other events, and I had started wondering, does he find it boring to be with me, or have I gone from being his lover and wife to just a mom? But it seems those worries were unfounded. The complex I had felt for so long vanished, and the recent concerns about Tom also seemed resolved. Looking back, I realize I was on cloud 9. The day after my husband's suggestion, I began planning the guest list. I have 4 close friends. I've been friends with them since high school, and even through college and starting our careers, we've remained tight-knit. Laura is a hardworking lawyer, Nancy is a working mom of 4-year-old twins, Rachel is currently expecting, and Isabel works at the same company as her husband. Though each of us is in a different stage in life, we regularly meet up for meals and trips, always staying in touch. I wanted to hand out wedding invitations to these 4 besties in person, so I decided to organize a lunch gathering. Congrats on the wedding. That sounds weird, right? Happy wedding, Michelle. Thanks for the invite. Rachel, the pregnant one, exclaimed. Thanks. Tom was like, let's have a wedding. I was so happy. But Rachel, make sure you don't overdo it, okay? You gotta take care of yourself," I said, only to be interrupted by Nancy, a mother of two.
"No worries. I was working full-time when I was in her shoes. A wedding is a piece of cake."
I had a tough time even with just one kid. Everyone's different, so really, Rachel, don't push yourself. While we were discussing, Laura, the lawyer, playfully pinched my right shoulder. "Hey! Don't flaunt your happiness like that." It's hard for Isabel and me to join the conversation. "Right, Isabel?" Isabel, looking a bit distracted, responded, "Huh? Oh, yeah. Seriously, don't show off." I observed Isabel and felt something was off. She seemed less lively than usual. Isabel was usually the lively one, often considered the cute youngest of our group of four. So, her being unusually silent was definitely off. I wondered if the topics we were discussing were unsettling for Isabel, who was still single, or if they were subjects she'd rather we not touch upon. I chose not to delve deeper into it. On the day of my wedding, I was so excited I felt like I could fly. My husband and son were both dressed in matching tuxedos, and I finally got the chapel wedding I'd always dreamed of. My parents, who had initially opposed the marriage, finally seemed to accept and acknowledge us. They were all smiles at us, the newlyweds. I was worried about Rachel, who was pregnant, and Isabel, who seemed a bit down, but I was overjoyed to have all four of my dearest friends present with me. It was a truly, truly happy and wonderful wedding. I had planned so many special things for the reception afterwards. I was sure it would be a great time. I had no inkling of anything amiss. For the reception meal, we had prepared a French full course. I'd often heard brides say they were too nervous to eat much at their reception, but having been married for 3 years already, I was calm and collected. While enjoying the delicious French cuisine, I was comforted watching my son, seated between my husband and me, happily munching on his kid's meal. My son had been such a good boy, sitting quietly. We had promised him that if he got fussy, we'd take him to sit with his grandparents. He looked so adorable behaving like that. The reception went on without a hitch. Greetings from my husband's boss and colleagues I had worked closely with. A slideshow our friends had made showcasing our family's memories. There were tears and laughter. It truly was a great time. We went for a wardrobe change. My son had drawn patterns on our pristine white dress and suit with fabric crayons. All three of us matched. For the candlelight service and photo session, I had always known I wanted to wear this dress. After the candlelight service, I took photos with family, relatives, and friends. Everyone complimented my dress, which made me so happy. I caught a glimpse of my husband chatting with Isabel. They knew each other, so there was nothing unusual about it. You see, around the time my husband and I got legally married, Isabel was struggling with workplace harassment at her former job. So, she consulted my husband, who worked in HR, and he spoke on her behalf to his company, leading Isabel to transfer there. Since then, it seemed that Isabel often sought job advice from my husband. Considering I worked in a hotel, I figured my husband, being in the same workplace, would be better equipped to counsel her, so I too asked him to look out for Isabel. My husband appeared to be genuinely concerned, regularly assisting her since then. So, even when I saw Isabel laughing and taking pictures with my husband, I didn't think much of it. Things took a turn right before I was about to read a letter of gratitude to my parents. It happened while I was listening to a guest's speech. All of a sudden, my vision blurred, and everything in front of me seemed to shake. Up until that point, I felt perfectly fine, but all at once, my sight got fuzzy, and my thoughts became jumbled. I've got to hold it together. Even though that's what I thought, maintaining my seated posture became challenging.
I'm gonna fall!
By the time that thought crossed my mind, I was already on the floor.
Michelle! What happened? I could faintly hear the alarmed voices of those around me.
Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance," but I wanted to tell them, "No, I'm fine." Yet, I couldn't muster the strength to speak. My husband cradled me, constantly reassuring, "It's okay, it's gonna be all right, Michelle. It's just a sleeping pill, don't you worry." You'll be fine in a jiffy.
Sleeping pill? What did he mean by that?
I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't, and without understanding what he meant, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital. Beside me, my husband was holding my hand. Once he realized I was awake, he immediately called for the doctor. The doctor's diagnosis? An overdose of sleeping pills. Do you recall taking anything? The doctor asked. Of course, I had no such recollection. My husband seemed just as clueless, and we both shook our heads. The police wanted to get involved, considering the possibility of foul play. I told the police I had no memory of the event and had never taken sleeping pills. My husband stated, "We have no clue. Many people were around our food, so it's hard to say who might be suspicious. Heck, it might even be one of the hotel staff for all we know." I remembered me husband telling me, "It's just a sleeping pill, you'll be all right," before I blacked out, which made his statement seem odd to me. In the end, with neither of us having any leads, the culprit remained unidentified. The police said they'd continue their investigation and left. It was decided I should stay in the hospital for a couple of days just to be safe, and our son would be looked after by my parents. Relatives and friends rushed to the hospital for support. Once I was awake, and after the police finished their inquiries, they left. Left alone in the room, I was in a daze for a while. But after some time, feeling thirsty, I decided to drag my stand and head to the hospital shop to grab a drink. Then, in the hallway on the second floor near the store, I spotted my husband and Isabel together. "What's going on?" I thought as I approached. I couldn't believe my ears when I overheard their conversation. "There was no need to go that far. It wasn't a lethal dose, so it's fine. It's your fault for having a wedding with that woman when I'm around. I just ruined it because I didn't like it." Isabel said that, wrapping her arm around my husband. I couldn't process what was happening. What's their relationship? Are they just colleagues? What did she mean by lethal dose? I knew I couldn't get caught listening, so I hid behind a pillar in the hallway to overhear their conversation. My husband caressed Isabel's head, saying, "I'm real sorry. You're the only one that matters to me. I had a feeling Michelle was getting suspicious lately, so I just put on a show with that wedding. I explained it to you, didn't I? I don't want to be taken for a ride with ridiculous child support. It's just till we don't have to spend on Laura anymore. You know?" Isabel, narrowing her eyes at her husband, said in a coquettish voice, "You promised, remember?" Hearing that, even I could tell what kind of relationship my husband and Isabel had. They were having an affair. Deceiving me, keeping our marriage intact, all while continuing their illicit relationship. A marriage of convenience just for the sake of it. Moreover, Isabel, who wasn't satisfied with even that ceremony, drugged it to ruin it. I've been betrayed by my husband and Isabel, the two most important people, all this time. After that, tears wouldn't stop flowing. I couldn't bear to watch my husband and Isabel getting all lovey-dovey anymore. I gave up going to the hospital store, returned to my room, and pulled the sheets over my head. My emotions were all over the place, but oddly enough, my mind was clear. The more I thought about it, the more unforgivable what my husband and Isabel did became. I was filled with regret and sadness. "You should rest up." Even though the doctor told me that, I was wide awake and couldn't sleep. I cried all night, and as the sun rose, I was determined to get my revenge on the two of them. 24 hours ago, the love I thought I had for my husband, whom I believed I loved so much, had vanished. And the friendship I valued so much with Isabel had disappeared without a trace. With that resolve, I was plotting my revenge against the two. Unaware of this, my husband came to visit me first thing in the morning and tried to strike up various conversations. Honestly, it was nothing but stressful. "I'm still feeling a bit out of it, so I'm gonna sleep." Saying that, I pulled the covers over and pretended to sleep, all the while lost in thought. I want to take everything away from those two. From my husband, I want to take away our home, his job, and all his money. From Isabel, I want to take away her job, her friends, and my husband. Now, what should I do to achieve that? I couldn't come to a conclusion on my own. However, for now, I needed proof of my husband's and Isabel's affair. I knew that much was necessary. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Desiring swift revenge on the two of them, the very next day, I headed to a private investigator's office to gather evidence of Tom and Isabel's affair, and to find out whether Isabel had been prescribed sleeping pills. I had 2 requests. After that, I contacted Laura, who's a lawyer. Even though she was surprised when I told her we needed to talk right after my discharge, Laura made time for me. The meeting place? Laura's law office. Wanna go to a cafe or a restaurant? I replied to her kind offer. I'd like to talk somewhere private. So, it was decided to meet at the law firm where Laura worked. In the long run, I had thought of officially hiring her as my attorney, so this might have been for the best. I immediately told Laura everything I had seen that day at the hospital. Laura was visibly shocked, but after some thought, she said, "Come to think of it, Isabel was always praising Tom a lot." Then she added, "If it's true that Isabel had an affair with Tom and she's behind the incident, that's despicable. I'd like to think of Isabel as my close friend too, so I really don't want to believe this. However, I'll help you gather all the evidence thoroughly. If we don't find any, we'll pretend this conversation never happened. But if we do, I'll be fully on your side, Michelle." I could understand Laura's disbelief. I'd probably have a hard time believing it if I were in Laura's shoes too. For a while, under Laura's guidance, I tried to gather evidence without letting husband catch on. However, the results weren't great. His phone was securely locked and he always had it with him. He also seemed cautious, as the number of times he went out drinking had decreased. The private detective I hired had the same results. There were pictures of him and Isabel eating together, traveling in a car, but none of them provided solid evidence of an affair. The only progress was with the sleeping pills. I found out that Isabel, who had been bullied at work 3 years ago, had been prescribed them by a doctor, and I learned the type of drug she'd been given. I didn't know what type of sleeping pill I had been given, so I stored this information as evidence to eventually submit to the police. Then, I told Laura about the only evidence I found, which was the medicine. Laura suggested, "What if Michelle pretends to be away from home? Maybe Tom will let his guard down?" "No way. He'd never do that," I laughed, but Laura was serious. I laughed, but Laura was dead serious. "You know, I've handled quite a few divorce cases, and it's surprisingly common. Spouses doing things at home when the other's away. I think it's worth giving it a shot." So, I decided to give it a try. The timing was mid-February, right around Valentine's Day. "I want to take our son and visit my parents out in Nebraska before I start working in March," I told him. When I said that, Tom responded, "Sounds great. Go ahead," and he was supportive. I told him I'd be gone for a week, leaving on a Thursday and coming back the following Wednesday. In reality, the plan was to stay in Nebraska for a couple of nights, show Tom pictures and video calls of us there to reassure him, and then see if anything happened over the weekend. It was all Laura's idea. She also suggested setting up hidden cameras at 3 points in the house: the entrance, living room, and bedroom. This was also Laura's idea, and the camera was something she borrowed from an acquaintance of hers. As planned, I sent Tom pictures of my son and me in Nebraska and made video calls to him. He genuinely seemed happy to see us having a good time. Maybe I had misunderstood what happened at the hospital. I couldn't see any signs of abnormal behavior from husband. But the next day shattered that notion. I checked the surveillance cameras I had set up. First thing in the morning, Tom had turned off the pet camera we use for our son or covered it with cloth. My husband was clearly acting strange. And then, at 7 p.m., it wasn't just husband who came home from work. He brought Isabel with him. Today's Friday. It must have been perfect for the two of them, having the next day off. Maybe Isabel will stay over the entire weekend. I quickly contacted Laura. So, Isabel's the one he's cheating with, huh? After Laura sounded disappointed, she said, come back here tomorrow. We're gonna get revenge on those two. She said that to me. All this time, on the surveillance footage, husband and Isabel were getting all cozy. I stared at the screen, mulling over the revenge plan Laura and I had devised. The next day, I had to go back home after being called into work. I told my parents and had them look after my son. I was hesitant to tell them the truth, but I knew if I did, my dad would say, hold on. I'm coming too. I could already picture him causing a scene, so I held back. Returning to New York, I visited Laura's office. Laura greeted me with a worried look. Michelle, are you okay? I'm fine. Sure, I was shocked for a moment when I saw it yesterday. But I've no love or affection left. I just want to break things off ASAP. Besides, knowing I'll have evidence makes me kinda excited. When I responded like that, Laura looked somewhat relieved. Then, the two of us reviewed the surveillance footage to finalize our plan. Once we confirmed that my husband and Isabel had left the house, we would break in. We had already secured some space for Laura and me in the bedroom closet, so we'd hide there. We'd monitor the surveillance footage, wait for my husband and Isabel to come home, and make our move when they showed evidence. During that, I would snap photos with my smartphone. Laura would record a video. However, my cautious husband didn't seem to want to leave the house at all. Isabel tried persuading him several times, saying, come on, let's go out. Let's have a date. But he declined every time. Watching with impatience, they finally left in the car to get groceries for dinner. As soon as Laura and I confirmed that, we executed our plan. We quickly went back to the house and successfully hid in the closet. After waiting for about an hour, my husband and Isabel returned, holding hands. It seemed like Isabel was gonna cook dinner, wearing an apron, but it was evident she had nothing on underneath. Seeing Isabel like that, my husband, seemingly overwhelmed by passion, pushed her onto the couch and started to make a move. We exchanged glances and nodded, then left the closet and approached the two of them. The first to notice me was my husband, who had been holding Isabel from behind. Our eyes met, and my husband froze for about 5 seconds, then turned pale, and immediately let go of Isabel. Why'd you stop? Isabel said in a playful voice, lifting her head, and she froze too. She said to the two of them, I knew you two were in that kind of relationship. I wanted proof but couldn't get any. That's why I made up the story about going back home. Now I can get a divorce.
When did you find out?
My husband asked, his voice trembling. I overheard you two at the hospital. So, I knew you both drugged me.
Wait a minute, that's not true. I didn't drug her. It was Isabel who did it on her own.
As expected, my husband spilled the beans about the drug. I grinned. Did you get it, Laura? Got it perfectly. With that, Laura entered the living room.
Why the heck is Laura here?
The first to react was Isabel. Michelle hired me. I didn't want to believe that Isabel was cheating and drugging drinks, so I was helping her gather evidence to prove it wrong. But I was shocked to see that it was actually true on the video.
What do you mean by request?
Tom, having met Laura a few times and knowing her profession, asked anxiously. Tom. What you did counts as infidelity. Michelle has the right to divorce you and claim alimony.
Whoa! Hold on. It's not like that. It was just a fling with Isabel. Please don't get the wrong idea.
Laura's words shook him, and the husband quickly denied them.
Wait a minute. A fling? You told me once our kid grows up, you were gonna divorce Michelle, didn't you? Was that a lie?
Of course it was.
Who the hell would choose someone like you over their family?
Isabel was lost for words at husband's harsh statement. Seeing Isabel's reaction, Laura decided to pile on more. I'm sorry to say this when you're upset, Isabel, but we also got testimony that you drugged Michelle's drink.
So what?
You can be charged with crime of injury. The police will be here any minute now.
What?
Laura was speechless. She seemed too shocked to say anything.
Wait. Stop it. It was just a joke, right? Tom, help me out here.
Isabel cried out to my husband for help. Tom ignored Isabel's pleas. Laura said to him, "If you knew that Isabel was mixing in sleeping pills, there's a chance you could be considered an accomplice."
Why me? She did that on her own.
Afterwards, when the police arrived and were shown the footage we had taken earlier, both Isabel and husband were taken to the station for questioning. Additionally, when I mentioned the information I'd obtained from a private investigator about her being prescribed sleeping pills, they responded, "We'll thoroughly investigate that matter as well." I was told that. After Tom and Isabel were taken away, I booked a hotel room and toasted with Laura. I didn't want to spend another second in that house. And for the final touch at the hotel, I sent videos of the affair and the testimony about the sleeping pills to the company where Tom and Isabel worked. The effect was immediate. A week later, husband was questioned at the police station. Fortunately, he wasn't charged, but he did lose his job. After the company saw the two videos and confirmed the facts, several testimonies came forward about the two acting suspiciously at work. As a result, my husband was forced into voluntary retirement. Everything went according to mine and Laura's plan. Around that time, I began discussions about divorcing my husband. My husband came alone to Laura's office. "Didn't you hire a lawyer?" He replied, "I asked a friend, but they turned me down because they said the odds were overwhelmingly against me." Then, after taking a deep breath, he began to plead.
"That's not why I came today. I came to ask Michelle for forgiveness. Please. I'll pay alimony or whatever it takes, just don't divorce me."
Saying this, my husband got on his knees and begged. I was unmoved by his pleas. Why would anyone want to get back with a man who cheated and is now unemployed? At least, I don't. Let's get a divorce.
No. I'll never do it again. Please reconsider. And Tom Jr. needs his father, right?
I was disgusted that he would bring up our son at this point.
We don't need a jobless father who's been unfaithful. Even without you, I'm confident I can raise our child without any hardship.
Despite what I said, my husband tried to continue with his excuses and begging. Laura interrupted him. "This isn't going anywhere. Should we bring this to mediation? Tom, you're clearly at a disadvantage. The legal fees will just deplete your savings. For us, as long as we get the divorce, it doesn't matter how. But for you, it'll just be like throwing your money away." Tom held his head in his hands and let out a scream. After pondering for a good 5 minutes, my husband finally said, "Give me some time to think," he said in a strained voice, and then left the office. Seeing his state, Laura and I couldn't contain our laughter and burst out laughing. 2 weeks later, Tom messaged me agreeing to the divorce and we decided to meet again. The location was once again Laura's office. My husband who came looked extremely worn out. It seemed like he had given up this time, as he unemotionally accepted all the terms Laura proposed. In the end, he would pay a compensation of $15,000, monthly child support of $400, and I'd also get half of my husband's severance pay. We settled on the agreement with no division of assets for my husband. However, he seemed unable to find a new job and begged, "Can I make the compensation payments in installments?" Without any division of assets, the only money he had was his severance pay. Being jobless, he probably had no choice but to use that for living expenses. Reluctantly, I agreed to let him pay in installments by increasing the compensation to $16,000 as interest. And so, we got divorced without a hitch. I managed to get the money as planned and rendered my husband jobless. I believe I took everything from my husband, family, job, and money. Next is Isabel. For days after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Isabel's lawyer, asking to settle the matter of the wedding out of court. Just like always, we decided to discuss it at Laura's office. As soon as Isabel entered the office, she pleaded, kneeling down, "Please forgive me. I'll pay any amount of compensation." Recalling my husband groveling in Laura's office, I had to chuckle, "Not gonna happen." That's what I replied. "Why? Aren't we friends?"
I'm hurt.
The look on Isabel's face made me angry.
Who had an affair with a friend's husband and then drugged me? It was you who betrayed me first, wasn't it, Isabel? I don't consider you a friend anymore. That's harsh. The sleeping pills weren't a big deal, and I broke up with Tom, didn't I?
Isabel shouted back.
So what? I'm still hurt. Besides, if you want Tom, he's all yours.
As I said this, Isabel seemed a bit pleased. But just so you know, he's unemployed. He quit his job after the affair with you got out. Now he's jobless and can't even pay me alimony. If you're okay with such a man, go ahead. I guess you're content with my leftovers," I said with a smug face. Suddenly, Isabel shrieked and lunged at me. Quickly, her lawyer stepped in to intervene. "That was attempted injury, right?" Laura remarked, causing the lawyer's expression to darken. "As for the wedding issue, feel free to sue. But please let this one slide," the lawyer pleaded. Laura asked me, "Michelle, are you okay with this?" When I nodded in agreement, Laura said, "All right, we'll drop the settlement. We'll proceed with suing Isabel."
No way! Laura, that's too harsh. I never did anything to you.
"I'm not your friend. Nancy and Rachel, after hearing about this, were disgusted with you. Don't you think you're out of friends?" When Laura said this, Isabel began crying hysterically. "That's so unfair. What did I even do?" Probably fearing another assault, Isabel was practically dragged out of the office by her lawyer. Laura and I burst into laughter. "No matter what you did, it wasn't an affair and an injury case."
Well, which one is worse?
But with this, I successfully took away Isabel's job, friends, and husband. I felt very satisfied. It's been 6 months since then. In the end, since we didn't settle out of court, Isabel was arrested for causing injury. Isabel's parents apparently heard about the arrest from Laura and her friends, and they came to apologize with compensation. According to her parents, she won't likely get probation because she's been denying and showing a bad attitude. We've tried talking to her, but she seems to have given up and won't listen. On the other hand, her ex-husband seems to be struggling just to pay the compensation. He apparently hasn't been able to find a full-time job yet and is working a construction-related part-time job during the day. At night, he's juggling a job in the cleaning industry, desperately trying to cover alimony, child support, and his own living expenses. I'd be in a bit of a bind if the money stopped coming in, so I hope he doesn't work himself to the ground. As planned, I returned to the hotel job. I've been leaving my son in daycare, so I feel bad he might be lonely, but I make sure to spend all my off days playing with him. With the money I got from my ex-husband, I can easily make a down payment on a condo, so I'm also house hunting. Once things settle down at the hotel, I'm gonna pay the down payment and buy it. My current life, with work and time with my son, is much more fulfilling and fun than when I was a stay-at-home mom living with my ex. Moving forward, I want to cherish this life and hope to someday meet someone great.
I'm telling you to leave. You woman who can only give birth to girls.
The one glaring at me with utter contempt was my husband, Jake. I instinctively rubbed my belly. I had borne 3 daughters through this belly, in pain, for Jake. But what Jake really wanted was a son. I still remember how after giving birth to our eldest and then our second daughter, he said, "Next time it will be a boy." When our third daughter was born, Jake even left the naming all up to me. Ah, is this finally heading to divorce? I felt like sighing. With a faint smile, my husband assured me not to worry about a successor, there's already someone else who can bear him a son. I'm Susan, a full-time homemaker. And I just turned 40. I live with my husband, Jake, and our 3 daughters. It's been 3 years since I gave birth to our 3rd daughter. This month, I've decided to quit being a homemaker to go to work. It's because, on Jake's salary alone, we couldn't afford to provide lessons for our 2 older daughters. I decided to work for the sake of our 3 children. Fortunately, I found a job quickly, and now I'm managing to cover our household expenses while working. Lately, Jake's been griping more and more about how his folks are getting on in years, and that I should be the one to take care of them.
Would be a big help if you could quit your job to look after my parents, Susan. That's out of the question right now.
Why?
We can live comfortably enough on just my salary if we don't splurge. Splurge? I've never done that. I'm working because your paycheck alone won't cover extracurriculars for the kids. They don't need any extracurriculars. It's perfectly fine if they don't learn anything extra.
This is the kind of nagging I always get from Jake. That's why I've learned to just brush it off whenever he brings it up.
Are you even listening, Susan? I hear you. I'll do what I can to help out.
Honestly, I can't stand my in-laws. I genuinely don't want to help with their care. But Jake and I live near his parents' place. It was his idea to start our married life in an apartment close to them. At the time, I didn't know their true colors and thought it'd be convenient for me, too, saying naively that it would be helpful. But it didn't take long to see their true nature. About 6 months into our marriage, my mother-in-law asked me to help clear space for a big table she bought so we could all gather anytime. That's when I started helping out at their house. I found myself constantly bossed around by my in-laws, being told where to put things, to tidy up, to serve tea, like some kind of servant. Being newly married, I couldn't handle it well and just kept helping as they told me to. Because of that, each time I visited their house, they treated me worse and worse. Every visit, I was like a little maid, having to listen to the in-laws boast about the old days or complain about their struggles for what felt like hours. And then, they'd end up meddling in our private life, pressing us to quickly produce a male heir. Even my husband, who said he wanted kids, would say things like, "Of course, I'd prefer a boy. Actually, if it's not a boy, there's no point in having one." When I was pregnant, all that those 3 cared about was the baby's gender. When they found out our first child was a girl, they insulted me and said things like, "Well, there's a saying, first a girl, then a boy. She'll be handy to have around." When the 2nd and 3rd turned out to be girls too, the in-laws openly lost interest in them. They'd just keep saying, "Next time, make sure it's a boy."
Why is this house such a mess? There's no rowdy boys running around, and still, you use being busy as an excuse. Can't you even clean properly? Maybe it's your laziness, that's why you can't have a boy. All these girls and all they'll do is get married off elsewhere. They can't be successors. You should be taking care of us, the heads of the family, instead of wasting time on girls who are no use as heirs.
To think these are their own grandkids they're talking about. I never invited them in the first place, and I sure as heck don't want to go to their place. Being dragged to their house and treated like this is more than I can stand. I've told Jake countless times that I want to keep our distance from his parents, but it's like talking to a wall.
The house being a mess is a fact. Girls are supposed to play quietly and read books, right? Instead, they just scatter their stuff everywhere. If you can't manage housework and childcare, which are supposed to be a woman's job, then it's no wonder you're being criticized. How can you say that when we're both working to raise our 2 kids? It's impossible for housework and childcare to be only my responsibility. If working is your excuse, then just quit and be a stay-at-home mom. If you can't do that, then what my mother's saying is right. You think you can support me and our 3 daughters on your salary alone? That's why I'm working, too.
It gives me a headache just thinking about it. Sure, there was a time when men worked and women took care of the home and kids. But those days are long gone. Now it's normal for wives to work, too. But to accept the changing times while still insisting that housework and childcare are solely a wife's responsibilities is just too convenient. No matter how much I try to convince him, Jake just won't change. Mom's right. It must be as Dad says. Every time I heard these words, thoughts of divorce crossed my mind. But my daughters, oblivious to everything, were fond of Jake. Only the eldest, a middle schooler, seemed to have some reservations about Jake. Being in the throes of adolescence, she didn't seem to be very interactive with Jake. Yet, whenever I saw the third girl innocently laughing and clamoring to be held by Jake, calling him Daddy, Daddy, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. 3 months had passed since then. For some reason, Jake started coming home late more frequently. I was suspicious and asked him when he returned home.
Jake, you've been quite late recently. Is something up at work?
No, it just happened today.
A junior messed up, and I had to cover some overtime. Don't worry about it.
At first, I believed his words, but he began to come home late more often, and I asked again. Then Jake started making excuses like he was held up at work entertaining clients, or meetings with partners ran long. Even as I started to suspect Jake's words and actions, I couldn't muster the courage to take that step away because I didn't want to deprive my children of their beloved father. I started to pretend not to care about Jake's late returns. Half a year had gone by in this way. A colleague I worked with mentioned seeing Jake walking in the downtown area with a young woman. I dismissed it to her, saying Jake was at work, but she insisted she wasn't mistaken. Our families are close, often going camping or having barbecues together on holidays, and my daughters are around the same age as hers. Jake and she always got along well whenever they met. So I knew she couldn't have mistaken someone else for Jake. But even knowing this, my desire to trust Jake was stronger, and her suggestion to approach him next time made my heart skip a beat. I told her I'd talk to Jake about it, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. I went to see a private investigator immediately after work and requested a surveillance operation. 5 days later, the investigator got back to me, saying it had been quite straightforward. When I met the investigator after work, I was presented with substantial evidence. There were several photos of Jake entering a hotel with another woman, and the results were incriminating. I decided to confront Jake about the affair as soon as I got home. Though he had gotten home before me, he was just looking at his phone in the living room. I saw my eldest daughter take her younger sisters to her room. And while I felt sorry, I couldn't keep it to myself.
Jake, can you explain this to me? You said you were working overtime or entertaining, but is entertaining clients at a hotel part of the job?
Jake didn't respond to my words and just started making a phone call with a cold expression. For some reason, Jake remained silent, determined not to speak.
So your silence means you admit it's true? It's none of your business. You really think a husband's affair is none of his wife's business? It's none of your business.
No matter how many times I asked, Jake only repeated that it was none of my business. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. While I was thinking of pretending we weren't home, Jake quickly went to open the door. In came my in-laws and the woman from the investigator's photos.
What's going on? Did you call them here?
I hadn't planned on telling the truth until everyone arrived.
Well, now that everyone's here, explain these photos.
I challenged Jake again with the photos.
The girl there is pregnant with a boy. Our family has always needed a son to carry on the family line. I told you before we got married that we needed a son. But you kept having girls. So, you're no longer needed and should leave right away.
Just when I thought Jake was starting to make sense, he handed me a divorce paper with an explanation that didn't make any sense.
Hold on, pregnant? How many affairs do you need to have for that to happen? Sure, I knew about the son issue, but we can't choose the gender of our babies. Besides, you always seem to love our daughters.
Susan, you've heard the story, but you're someone who could only have girls. Just leave this house quietly.
I'm sorry, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my husband, Jake. What's going on?
As I pressed Jake for answers, my in-laws interjected.
That's enough. We're finally having the boy we always wanted. It's best for you, who couldn't do anything, to leave. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you, Jake. So why do both of you come barging in? Don't try to change the subject.
At my words, my husband lets out a heavy sigh. Enough already. There's no need to discuss this. All Susan has to do is leave this house quietly.
What are you saying? We have 3 daughters. And you know as well as I do that it's impossible for me to support all 3 with my current income, right, Jake?
That's none of my business. You're the one who wanted to have 3 girls. Just get out already.
Don't be ridiculous. What do you mean, wanted? You used to dote on all 3 of them too, didn't you, Jake? Why would you say something like this all of a sudden?
I thought my husband would say something in response to my words, but it was his mistress who retorted.
Oh, this is why dealing with an older woman is such a hassle. When you're told to leave, you should just leave gracefully. What are you even doing here? It's because of you showing up that our family is in this mess.
Mess?
Don't you mean it's your fault for not being able to have a boy?
The mistress sneers at me with a snort. I painfully realize that I've expected too much from my husband. We have 3 kids, and our youngest adores her dad, so I wanted to believe that divorce isn't the only right answer. I thought he would think of the children when faced with the evidence. Even if he didn't have a change of heart and we couldn't be a happy family, I believed he would at least act the part of a good father in front of the kids. But in reality, he shamelessly brings home not just his parents but even his mistress.
I understand. I'll file for divorce.
I was too naive. That's what I realize as I stand up to pack my things. I had thoughts about the mistress, smirking as she watched, but I didn't care anymore. I snatched the divorce papers from my husband and signed them. I write my name as the guardian for our daughters.
I'm taking custody of all 3 girls. I'll be filing for alimony and child support later. I'm leaving now, but I'll come back for the things I can't take with me today.
Do whatever you want. My in-laws, who usually make snide remarks, listened to our conversation with dissatisfied expressions. It seems they've left this discussion up to my husband. Knowing this, my husband confidently tells me off. Feeling the tense atmosphere, I hug my eldest daughter, who has been cautiously observing from the room. Maybe she understood just from that because she immediately started packing her things. The middle and youngest daughters, thinking they are going on an outing, cheerfully prepare their to-go bags. Even as we gather our bare essentials and head for the front door, no one comes out from the living room. The middle and youngest daughters look puzzled, but when they wave goodbye cheerfully, they leave the house in high spirits. I call my parents' house. I haven't been home much since I moved far away after getting married. Despite the sudden call, my mother tells me to come back as soon as I can. They offer to pick us up, so we decide to stay in a hotel for the night. There, without telling my daughters about their father's affair, I explain, Daddy and Mommy are just heading down different paths now. The younger 2, who love idols, recall a recently disbanded group who had said the same thing.
Does that mean we can't be together anymore?
It seems my eldest understands what I'm saying. I return to my parents' home with my daughters, and we are swamped with changing our family registry and various other legal and administrative processes. And before I know it, 2 months have passed, and I successfully received alimony and child support from my husband and his mistress. I had filed for compensation for the affair against both, and additionally for child support from my husband. Not wanting to see their faces ever again, I conducted everything through a lawyer. It cost money, but it was worth it to avoid the stress. The lawyer's visit to my in-laws to discuss alimony and child support was met with their silent bitterness, like they were swallowing a bitter pill. Nevertheless, my husband had an affair and even got another woman pregnant, which looks bad to outsiders. To prevent more complications, both my husband and my in-laws hastily gathered the funds for payment. It seems they even covered the mistress's portion of the alimony. Another 3 months go by. While we can't afford luxuries, my parents have supported us, and the 6 of us have been able to start living a peaceful life together. I was just beginning to get used to life without my husband, as were our daughters. On his day off, my husband suddenly called me. When I ignored him, the phone kept ringing over and over. I thought it would be trouble if it kept ringing until our daughters returned from their lessons, so I reluctantly decided to answer my husband's call.
Good, you finally picked up. What do you want all of a sudden? Well, you see, the woman I cheated with just gave birth. What am I supposed to say to that?
I was about to hang up coldly when my husband suddenly raised his voice.
The legs! I mean the crotch!
According to my husband, the child that his mistress had given birth to was a girl. Moreover, it wasn't a case of a mix-up during the ultrasound. The doctors had been saying it was a girl from the start. The mistress had lied about the baby's sex because she wanted to marry my husband, who apparently would have considered divorce if it weren't a boy, but his parents put a stop to that. They were worried about not having any grandchildren if things continued as they were, so my husband called off the divorce. He was supposed to be thinking about having another child right away, but his life was in shambles, and he couldn't focus on that. Right after the birth, she couldn't work and had no income. She'd refused to do housework perfectly because of child-rearing, and she flatly denied doing any caregiving for my in-laws. Of course, if you're living with a baby who may or may not have a steady head yet, it's going to be like that. It's tough to take care of household chores perfectly when you're desperate with a baby, and you don't have the physical strength or spare energy to take care of elderly parents. Yet, living with this new wife, my husband now told me he was thinking of divorce again.
So? What do you want me to do about it?
I responded coldly, and my husband said, "Susan, please, can't we start over?"
Huh? As if I have any intention of getting back together with you now.
I lashed out at him.
Don't talk like that. Despite having thorns like a rose, you're delicate and bloom beautifully, aren't you? I love that about you, Susan. Let's give it another try.
My husband was trying to hold me back with his poetic words. Those words gave me chills.
Susan! Are you listening? We've been together for a long time. Your feelings haven't changed just because we've been apart for a bit, have they?
Perhaps I would have been moved by my husband's words of love if this were back when we were married, but after discovering his affair and getting a divorce, all I could feel was coldness. I just gave a bitter smile.
You're smiling, so that means you forgive me, right?
My husband happily misunderstood.
Huh? You're totally clueless. That was a bitter smile. I'm not laughing, and I haven't forgiven you. Why do you have to say that? Susan, please consider getting back together. Haven't we always been doing well? You were happy with me, weren't you? We were not doing well, that's why we fought so many times. I wasn't happy, that's why I divorced you. It was you who said you didn't need me. That's true, right? Then we can start over. It was me who suggested we break up, so I'm suggesting we start over. Let's do it.
My husband started spouting nonsense about wanting to reconcile. He even brought up old times, and honestly, I was fed up. But then, a thought struck me, and I changed the subject. Oh, about Kate.
Why do you know her name? She didn't introduce herself that time, did she?
My husband sounded surprised when I mentioned the name of my remarriage partner. Of course, I know.
I heard it from the detective, and I even sent a certified mail for the alimony claim. And about her. What about Kate? I was just wondering who she might be targeting next. She has a hobby of breaking up seemingly happy couples or married people, and since you and I are divorced, I was wondering who the next target is.
My husband said nothing. Perhaps he was speechless, mouth agape. I proceeded to explain to my unresponsive husband what I knew about this woman named Kate. Kate had always been adorable since she was a child, always surrounded by various people. Her father, the company president, doted on her, and she was spoiled, always getting what she wanted. It's precisely because she could get anything she wanted that taking things from others became her hobby. As an adult, her targets became other people's boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Since taking things was her hobby, she would easily discard them once she managed to start a relationship. When I introduced her dating history, investigated by a detective, to Jake, he gasped in a strangled voice.
What the heck? Why bring this up now? If you told me this when we were getting divorced, I wouldn't be in this mess. Back then, all you said was get out. You never listened to my side of the story. So, I did as I was told and left. It's not like a woman who approaches a married man can be considered good-hearted.
Don't talk like that. Susan, it's so sneaky of you, making it sound like it's my fault. If you had just explained things properly back then, it would have been different. Jake, for some reason, started to speak in a defeated tone, playing the victim when he spoke to me. Angered by his words, I snapped at him.
What are you on about? You're the one in the wrong, not like you are wrong. Why don't you just live however you want? I don't care anymore.
At my words, Jake suddenly spoke in a softer tone.
Susan, it's going to be tough raising 3 daughters all by yourself. Let me take at least one of them. If you let me take one, you'll have an easier time. Aren't 2 kids enough?
The cloying sweetness in his voice was so vile it made my head spin. What in the world does he think of our daughters? I could never send them to live with such a man. Neither Jake nor his parents really want the girls because they love them. He kept saying any girl would do, or just one, talking about them as if they weren't people. I could only see a future where they would be preyed upon by Jake and his parents. I knew that as they grew up, they would receive the same terrible treatment I did. That's why I refused adamantly.
Don't be ridiculous. I will raise my daughters properly. Don't be like that. A child needs her father, don't you think?
Jake argued defiantly.
A father who can't even raise his kids properly, let alone cheats, has no right to custody.
I spoke firmly, to leave no room for misunderstanding.
Even so, it's up to the girls to decide if they want a father like that. They're too young to decide for themselves now, so I'll take responsibility and raise them.
Enraged, I conveyed my feelings and hung up the phone on Jake. I don't know if it was because I immediately blocked his number, but I never heard from him again. Months went by. It seems Jake and Kate's divorce went through without a hitch. Kate went back home with her newborn child. Apparently, the child's father is also married, and she is being sued for alimony not just by Jake but also by his actual wife. Strapped for cash, she seems to be working hard at raising her child with the support of her parents back home. Terrifyingly, she shows no signs of remorse. She is aware that what she's doing is wrong, and if caught, she pays alimony as a sign of her sincerity. However, it seems that the money is also being provided by her father, who is a company president, allowing her to live a carefree life. It appears that the reason Kate went after my husband was just a whim. With her natural beauty and status, she would freely take other women's boyfriends and married men, and she decided to target married men as her next conquest. It just so happened that Kate set her sights on Jake and me when she saw us in town. It was a complete nuisance to have our lives disrupted by her caprice. And the reason Kate decided to marry Jake, something she usually didn't bother with after taking a man, was because Jake was indecisive and indulgent towards her. It seems Kate wanted a man who would treat her like a princess, indulging her every whim and buying her whatever she desired. Now, I couldn't care less about it all. I was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my easily swayed husband but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. My husband Jake was deceived by his affair partner, but he had the chance to refuse and didn't take the bait. No matter what stories I hear, the fact that Jake betrayed me won't just disappear. I also heard that Jake's family was ostracized by friends and relatives and had moved far away. They only stormed into my house once after the move. Susan, stop being stubborn and hand over one of the kids.
That's right, Susan. It's not good for a child to receive all the love from just one parent. We'll raise her together, the 3 of us.
Please stop.
I'm fine raising her on my own.
Thinking that my youngest daughter, who was still too young to understand, would be okay, the 3 of them came with a menacing look to take her away, and I resisted desperately.
You can't handle it, Susan. You can't raise her while working.
Hand her over, Susan. Poor thing.
Don't worry. We'll raise her properly. No matter what I said, they wouldn't listen. Stop! Don't take her! This is kidnapping! My youngest daughter cried loudly, and I screamed just as loudly. Thanks to our cries, the nearby residents gathered and quickly restrained the three of them. After a while, the police arrived from a call and took the three away. I repeatedly thanked my neighbors, relieved that my daughter was safe. Later, the three of them received a restraining order. But I'm considering moving. Because a restraining order isn't enough to make me feel safe. Since they know where we live, it wouldn't be strange for them to show up at any time. I've discussed moving with my parents, who live with us, because I feel sorry for them too. They said they'd dispose of the house and move with us, as it would be a nuisance to be followed forever. Still, I feel guilty for changing my daughter's environment so often. Yet, seeing their smiling faces and healthy growth heals me. I've decided to move to a new place to protect them. Just before moving, I got a call from an unregistered number. Thinking it was the moving company or someone from the city office, I answered, only to find it was surprisingly Kate. Summing up her sobbing story, she had apparently gotten into trouble for being with too many men and had contracted a serious disease. I need money for treatment, so give me back the alimony, she cried, but I responded coldly. Don't you have a wonderful dad who buys you everything? There's nothing I need to do for you. Her audacity was too much, and without much of a response, I just hung up. I immediately blocked her and bought a new cell phone, so now she can't reach me anymore. I'm grateful to my parents for coming with me, and I'm determined to keep working hard for my daughter's healthy upbringing.